Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Poetry Room at City Lights. My name is Peter Maravellis. I'm the events director here at City Lights. And as always, it is always a privilege and a honor to be able to record. For those of you online, hello, from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush peoples. I want to remember those who came before us as stewards of the land before we start. So tonight's event is being presented by City Lights in conjunction with Other Press, a really wonderful indie press on the East Coast, and Litz Institute of the Hungarian Cultural Center of New York. The book we are celebrating, that wonderful tome, which you see over there, Everything is Photograph, A Life of André Kertész. It is, of course, by the fabulous Patricia Albers, who is here with us tonight. So Everything is Photograph is the first full biography of the great innovator of modern photography. It's drawing on deep archival research, extensive interviews, and an interrogation of the images themselves. Kertész produced more than 100,000 images. So Everything is Photograph produces a vivid depiction of a life and artistic practice that extended from Hungary to France and America and across the 20th century. So Everything is Photograph immerses readers in Kertész's life like never before, and also offers a magnificent picture of the heyday of photography previously lost to us, but really brought back to life by Patricia Albers. So Patricia Albers is a California-based writer, editor, and art historian. She is the author of Joan Mitchell, Lady Painter, A Life, and the acclaimed first biography of the abstract painter. Her previous books include Shadows, Fire, Snow, The Life of Tina Modotti, and Tina Modotti and the Mexican Renaissance. Ms. Albers' essays, art reviews, and features have appeared in numerous museum catalogs and publications, including Square Cylinder, San Francisco Magazine, San Jose Mercury News, and the New York Times. She served as panelist for the National Endowment for the Humanities and a juror for the Biographers International Plutarch Award. We were going to have Gabrielle Selz with us tonight. Unfortunately, she could not make it. She had a family emergency. We do wish her the best. But the wonderful Renny Pritikin is here with us. We're very grateful for him stepping in kind of last minute. He is a curator, visual arts director, and educator, as well as art critic that has a very deep immersion in the arts world. He was co-director and later executive director of New Langdon Arts in San Francisco from 1979 to 1992. He also served as visual arts director and then chief curator at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts from 1992 until 2004. Also director of the Nelson Gallery and the Fine Arts Collection at UC Davis. So he's really a person who is totally immersed in the arts. He's the author of 5 published books of poetry, most recently Westerns and Dramas, published by Prelingual Library. We will be hosting a signing at the end of the evening. And we hope that to kind of get everyone on that side of the room and sort of in the single file line, and you may pay for the book after it's signed downstairs. There'll also be time for a Q&A. Please do wait until I reach you with the microphone so that the recording will pick it up and our friends online can hear it too. So please join us in giving them both a warm welcome.
Well, I want to start by thanking all of you for coming out tonight. I'm just so grateful to you. And, I owe so much to so many people in this room. I don't think I should even start, but I do want to single out my wonderful agent, Lori Fox, without whom none of this would have been possible. So thank you. Thank you, Lori. And thank you, Peter, for hosting us. Thank you to City Lights. André Kertész loved bookstores, and he loved bookstores with character. He lived in New York City. Last 3 decades of his life, he was near Book Row, 4th Avenue, lined with bookshops. Only the Strand now remains, but he would prowl around there often. And I think had he been in San Francisco, you would know him as the guy who's always, lurking with his camera. So, and thank you again to Renny for stepping in.
My pleasure. So in our preparatory conversations, you mentioned to me that for many folks, even many knowledgeable art world folks, Kertész name often elicits only a vague response along the lines of he was an important early modernist or something, right? So we agreed to start by asking the question, who was André Kertész? In the book, I was struck by the section in the introduction where you quote Henri Cartier-Bresson as saying, quote, "Whatever we have done, Kertész did it first." You share that both Bresson and Robert Capa met Kertész as kids, literally in their teens, early 20s, when they didn't know what they wanted to do with their lives. They were mostly thinking they would be writers. And Kertész recognized something in them, took them under his wing, and taught them how to take pictures. How do you, when you tell people you've just written this book, or in the last 5 years while you're working on it, and you got a blank stare?
I often did.
Yeah.
I got a blank stare, and then I got, now how do you pronounce that name?
So how would you begin to describe who he
Well,
was?
let me start by saying, giving everyone a framework and talking a little bit about who he was. He was arguably the most prolific and innovative photographer of the 20th century. And he was certainly among the most admired by his colleagues. He was born in Budapest, 1894. He moved to Paris when he was 31 years old. He lived in Paris for 11 years until 1936. And then he went on to New York, where he lived until he died in 1985. And during this period, so 73 years, he was a photographer. During those 73 years, he was constantly testing, exploring, trying new things, staking out new territory for photography. So that's a lot of what his colleagues picked up on. So, for example, he would work with optics and lenses with wonderful imperfections. He worked with reflecting pools. He worked with different kinds of mirrors. He also worked with cropping, so taking a larger negative and printing only a smaller part of it for purposes of interpretation. Some examples here. He invented something called the portrait in absence. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah, he invented the portrait of absence. So there's an example of that. This was, well, let me first explain. A portrait in absence, as he conceived of it, is a still life in which the objects embody the essential being or the creative life of those objects' owners. So it becomes simultaneously a still life and a portrait. So this is one of his colleague, Maurice Kissling, who was a painter from Central Europe. And you can see this family photographs, some of his things presumably in his studio. That mask is one that he made. He was very close to Modigliani. So that's Modigliani's death mask sitting at the top. So that was one avenue that he explored. Another one was the use of the Leica. So he was the first major photographer to use the Leica, this camera that revolutionized photography in lots of ways because it used cassette film. So up to this time, photographers had used cameras that with either glass plates or sheet film, and had to be changed between exposures. And now all of a sudden they could just flick of their thumb advance that film. So this lent itself to a spontaneous, a dynamic way of working. Kertész went on, he pioneered street photography. He pioneered subjective photojournalism, which we see an example here. So this was an article that he he did the photographs for it was the subject of the article was this nasty new thing called billboards. And so that's a billboard, so obviously that not your standard shot. And then finally he had this idea that everything is photograph. So whether it be the water in a gutter, whether it be his breakfast, whether it be his barber holding up the mirror to show him the back of his haircut, um, it was worthy of a photograph if it meant something to him, if it moved him, if it amused him. There always had to be that emotional connection. So that was also important.
Yeah, so I think people who are aware of him, maybe I'm confessing myself, think of him as a street photographer, the guy who invented street photography. But reading the book, it's really not true. He was much more complex and multifaceted than that. He was, in many ways, you could argue he was a formalist as much as many others were. And any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, let me again advance this. So this here's a example of we were asking me about why it was important to his colleagues. So Brassai, a street photographer of sorts, others as well, and they certainly. Let's see, another here. Yeah, here's another example. Cartier-Bresson, of course, was kind of very much a street photographer. And André and Cartier-Bresson had a lot of similarities in that they were both aficionados of the Leica. They were both very good at finding that decisive moment when a situation, all the elements of a situation that are in flux come together, and they click off the one shot that defines what's happening. And that's what Cartier-Bresson did. Kertész, in contrast, he worked that way, but he worked other ways as well. Going back there, where we were before, here's a shot that he did at night with a he was working for a magazine, but he did it with a view camera on a tripod, and that was fine. Any camera would be fine. Not any lens. He was very particular about lenses, but he as I said, he tried all kinds of things.
I think of the single cloud up against the skyscrapers.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, I think they have a slide in.
I think I have that. Yes.
Yeah, as a particularly formal picture, not a.
Yes. Well, he was very much into sort of formal construction. Maybe Brassai said of Kertész, he had these two elements that were very rare to find in the same photographer, both intense curiosity and this very strong sense of formal rigor.
Great, that's what I was trying to get. Thank you.
Okay, you got it.
So we thought it might be good also at the beginning to read the first 2 pages of the book.
Oh, I have to get the first 2 pages.
And the first 2 pages are an introduction to this very large book, and it riffs on this image.
So as I mentioned, Kertész moved from Budapest to Paris in 1925. He moved from Budapest because he, in Budapest, couldn't figure out any way to do the kind of photography that he wanted to do, which was not the acceptable kind, not the kind you could make money with. He had no interest in being a studio photographer. He had no interest in working for certain kinds of press jobs. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, and that was this kind of poetic wandering and connecting with little happenings in life. And how could you make a living with that? Well, he couldn't. So he tried all kinds of things. He was 32 years old. And finally, in desperation, he leaves Budapest, having borrowed money from his cousin so he can pay for the train ticket, and this is kind of his last chance. So this is a passage that's set several months after he's arrived in Paris. Self-portrait Paris is conjured from practically nothing. Parts of a door and a wall, the shadow of the photographer gripping the tripod attached to his camera. A shadow within a shadow, actually, because of the two light sources, one yielding an ordinary profile, the other an oafish umbra. Tucked into the picture's upper left corner is the only material object, the light box on the door. The lock resembles a camera with its covered keyhole as the lens, complete with focusing ring. What's behind that keyhole? The image offers no clues. Self-portrait Paris is a scene from a shadow play, a meditation on photography, seeing, and self, a nod to the negative-positive process, described by one of its inventors as the art of fixing a shadow. Behind the real camera that winter night in 1927 stood a tall, scrawny 32-year-old transplant to Paris. André Kertész had arrived from his native Hungary 16 months earlier on a train ticket, purchased with a loan from a cousin. Paris represented his best hope to establish himself as a photographer, whatever that meant. Photographers made their living from studio portraiture, newspaper work, or commercial jobs like supplying pictures for postcards. All that bored André. He wanted a more direct contact with life, but he did need to eat. He spoke little French, nor did he believe he could learn. He had no savings. Often he skipped meals or made do with bread, butter, and milk, tallying his purchases each night before bed. A baguette cost the equivalent of a nickel. A bottle of milk and cube of butter, 14 cents. His eyes were irritated. He couldn't sleep through the night, typically only 2 or 3 hours. Come afternoon, he might doze off on a park bench. In letters postmarked Budapest, André's family and friends were pleading with him to forget France and come home. As for his Hungarian girlfriend, if she still was his girlfriend, she had ordered him not to come home until he made a success of his life. In 8 years since the Great War had ended, he struggled to square his passion for photography with the pressure he felt to achieve worldly success. Yet he'd left Hungary still a nobody, in his estimation and hers. From his first hours in Paris, André had drifted through its parks and streets, brimming with inquisitive wonder about the city he was interpreting with his Goertz 10X, a favorite camera, his companion, his accomplice, almost his double. Locals tended to scurry by this lost-looking foreigner, but a bevy of friends eased his isolation. Nearly all were Paris-savvy émigré artists centered in Montparnasse, mostly Hungarians. André lingered in their studios, admired their art, and showed up at their parties. He would photograph, later giving prints to each of his friends. As they arranged themselves for a group picture, some laughing, some draping an arm on a friend's shoulder, one clutching a violin, another a bottle, André would position his camera on a tripod and set the timer, then dash in to include himself, affable, bright-eyed, and grinning. Most of his days included a stop at the Hungarian table on the terrace of the Café du Dôme, where every free spirit in Paris landed sooner or later. There his pals introduced him around and started a buzz about his unorthodox portraits, still lifes, and urban scenes, which they passed hand to hand. That had brought André a scattering of commissions, publicity shots for the string quartet led by his friend Ferry Roth, pictures of the Montmartre villa that the Viennese architect Adolphe Loos was building for the Dada poet Tristan Tzara, portraits of a doctor, a dancer, a bibliophile. The trickle of income had allowed him to rent the 7th floor walk-up on the Rue de Vanves in the 14th arrondissement, where he took Self-Portrait Paris. A maid's room, the size of a small storage space. It had no kitchen, bathroom, or heat. No one would describe the place as charming, even though André would fix it up with pictures, shelves, and linens sent by his mother. He was installing a darkroom. After 16 months of lugging his belongings from one threadbare hotel or makeshift bedroom to another, borrowing or improvising workspace, his garret represented a victory. He had a door with a lock and a dormer window. He had an airy, almost a home, a French home. So there he is.
So you get a sense of the amount of research that Patricia did from that section. So I thought the obvious question is, this is a 425-page book with another 75 pages of footnotes. What was your approach? What was your strategy? How did you get this done? It took you 5 years?
Well, I actually signed the contract in 2011. And I remember when I signed it, I said, this one's going to go faster because my 2 previous books took me 10 years each. I said, okay, this one's going to go faster. Now I know what I'm doing. So here we are, 2026. So I had a number of problems, a number of reasons why it took so long. And 2 of them I'll share with you. One is that there was both too much information and not enough. And what there was far-flung. Too much in the sense that André was a keeper. And so there were all kinds of papers, and these and photographs, obviously, and other documents. And these were essentially divided between 2 archives, one of which was in Paris and one in New York, because he had set things up in a way that didn't make sense for a researcher. So they're split. I was not given access to the one in New York, so that I didn't. I still don't know what's there. Paris, however, has all of his papers, presumably, and his negatives. So there was a lot in Paris. That said, what is in Paris isn't actually in the city itself. When I was working on this book, it was stored in a fort built in the 1880s, 50 miles west of Paris. So I would take the subway, I would get on a commuter train out past Versailles, go to the end of the line, get off the train, walk 20 minutes, and then I was in the fort, and then, whatever had to happen. So this was like hour and half, hour, 45 minutes each way. That was that part of the research. Didn't go quickly. So that was and when I got there, there'd be box after box after box after box, and I have to say, thank goodness the papers were classified, and Sandra Phillips, who is here, did that classification system, and I am so grateful. Not everything endured as I think you set it up, because many people have been through those boxes. But anyway, it was good in that way, but there was just an overwhelming amount of stuff. Some of which exists as copies in Los Angeles, but I wasn't ever sure what I was going to find at the Getty. I wasn't ever sure what I was going to find at the Getty and where there would be big gaps. And that was the other part of that, was that there were these holes, these black holes. One of which was that whatever's in New York. Another one of which was that André tried to conceal from the world his first marriage. So he destroyed all the photographs he took of his wife, of which there must have been many. Pretty much every piece of paper that showed any link between him and her. So that was a big hole. And then others as well, notably what happened to him during the World War II years. So there was that. And then my other big problem was Hungarian, because there were hundreds of pages of documents in Hungarian, which I do not speak. And many of them were, in fact, handwritten in Hungarian in old-fashioned script. And, a reasonable biographer would have stopped right there and said, okay, I can't do this. Let's think of a different project. So I leaned on so many Hungarians, translate this, or could I hire you for that? It was quite a process. At the Getty, where his copy of his diary, I was able to hire two Hungarian Americans, one of which is a professor at UCLA, the other is a filmmaker, and I would alternately spend time with the two of them at the Getty. We'd read his diaries, they would translate, and we'd talk about what was there, and so this went along for a while, and I thought, okay, I've got a pretty good fix, but there are still these missing elements. I will never find them because they're buried somewhere in distant archives. Then I had the great good fortune to receive an email one day from Georgi Nemeth, who is a Hungarian curator and researcher expert in 20th century Hungarian modern photography. And we communicated, we met. He very generously offered to help me fill some of those gaps. And I have to say, his research abilities are just jaw-dropping, and as is his persistence. And so thanks to Georgie's help, I was able to fill many of those gaps, and I think round out the picture of who he was as a person and what context he was working in.
Great. So you mentioned the three distinct periods in his life.
Right.
I thought maybe we go into that a little bit. Yeah. So just to repeat, born in 1894, grew up in a comfortable Jewish home. Is that fair to say? Or
yes, well, middle class, yes.
Middle class, yeah. Is a World War I veteran, is wounded.
Yes. So I've got a few just here from. Yeah, so he grew up in a he was one of three brothers. He grew up in a large extended family, and I think one of the things that comes through most strongly in his early Hungarian uh, work is these bonds with family, with friends. He seems very much uh, they're warm and they're curious. They're not unhappy. They're not melancholic, like some of the later work. He tended to use photography as a kind of mirror. So trying to figure out, as young people do, his relationship with the world, his self identity, his self narrative, and how he fit with larger groups of people. So, for example, the one here where he's with the fellow wearing, there are two of them wearing hats. So this was when he was desperately, trying to figure out how to make money, and he decided he was going to become a beekeeper. And so he apprenticed himself to this beekeeper and went out in the country and actually had quite a wonderful experience. But you can see there he is trying on this beekeeper persona, and that was the kind of thing that he would use photography for, to bring the world in closer and try to make sense of it. Also, he took a number of very beautiful photographs of rural Hungary. He grew up in Budapest, but he had relatives in the country, and he spent lots of time with those relatives and in other parts of the country. So these are examples of his work. The one with the geese is a photograph that Joel Meyerowitz, if some of you know his work, told me this was the photograph that convinced him he should become a photographer. And the photograph of the blind violinist there on the right. This was a photograph. Andre was actually at the beekeeper's home on a Sunday morning. He's lying in bed, and he hears violin music out on the street. He runs out with his camera, and this is what he finds. He had a single glass plate, and he again got the moment just right, I think.
So he's struggling to find a way to be a professional photographer. The 1920s, edging into the 30s, proto-fascism is rising. So there's a very right-wing anti-Semitic government in Hungary.
In Hungary, yes.
Makes it hard to establish oneself in any business, but particularly as an artist. He has a girlfriend who he's madly in love with, but says, if you don't start establishing yourself, I'm not going to marry you.
Right.
All these things come together, and he decides he has to start over in Paris.
Right.
And that's in 25, right?
Yes.
Has tremendous success after struggling for a few years, but eventually becomes very...
It's a struggle at first, and then gradually things improve. From the beginning, he was in love with Paris, and seduced by what Brassai said, that Kertész was the first photographer ever to reveal the seductive strangeness of Paris. And I think these are both good examples. Of course, it was the time of surrealism. Andre was never a surrealist. He didn't want to hear nobody, labels didn't work for him. He didn't want to be labeled. But surrealism was in the air, and I think you can see it in works like these. But you don't earn money from these. I mean, nobody else was. I mean, what do you do with pictures like this?
So he ended up, through, as in most artists' histories, they make the right connections. He was very assertive in meeting every Hungarian artist in Paris.
Well, I wouldn't call him assertive, but he did know enough to hang around at the Café du Dôme.
Right.
And at this time in Paris, you wanted to meet an important editor, you wanted to meet a well-known artist, well, that person might be at the next table over. So it was a place where your social life happened, but also where your professional life happened. And especially if you're passing around a few prints, people see what you do, and things start, connections start being made. One of the other foreigners he knew in Paris, actually was Belgian, um, took him around to take photographs, including a stop at the studio of Mondrian. So here was a connection that got made, and here was a chance for Andre to make photographs that set him on a path to work that was more geometric, more formally rigorous. So the one in the middle here is a photograph he took of Mondrian's studio. The other image on the right is also in the studio looking out to the stairwell. What Mondrian believed was he rejected any idea of the subjective or the representational in his work. He worked abstractly as a way of achieving a kind of universality, even a spirituality. And he very much believed that everything should be in harmony. The verticals needed to balance out with the horizontals and so forth. And you can see Andre has picked up on that in the image on the right, Chez Mondrian, where again, light and dark, vertical, horizontal, everything is where it needs to be. So he's making progress, and I'll just add in terms of his evolution, he meets people. Um, so we have here on the left Alexander Calder, who he liked and photographed here. Calder's working on his circus, which was these hundreds of pieces. I don't know if people know the circus, this wonderful thing. It's the Whitney today. These little animals and circus performers that he would make out of bits of this and that. And again, I think Andre looking at Calder and seeing Calder's environment sort of reflected this kind of mirror effect. Shadows make me think of what's maybe going on in his head. This connects with that, and that pulley goes here, and so forth. And then on the right is Colette, the writer, known for her very sensual prose. And there she is with these beautiful peony tulips. Notice her hand. So Andre was sent now on assignment. He was working for a magazine. He was sent on assignment to photograph the hands of well-known Parisian women. He's sent to photograph the hands of Colette, and he arrives at Colette's apartment, and she holds up one hand and says, "Oh, we can't do it. We can't do it. Look what happened. I burned my hand when I was ironing. And, this isn't going to work." And Andre says, "Yes, it's fine. It's okay. That's part of life too. It happens to you. It happens to all of us. Let's take the photograph." So here is Colette with one hand burned while she was ironing.
So from this point on, the money starts coming in, largely from magazines.
Well, yes. So there's a it's the beginning of the picture press. There's a new magazine in Paris called Vue, which was very innovative, so leading with the visuals, and the editors at the next table over in the dome. And Andre has a show. The editor sees the show and says, "Okay, that's what I'm after." And Andre starts getting assignments, such as the Colette assignment. Yeah.
You said, I think, that it was the inspiration for Life magazine. Is that?
It was the inspiration for Life. Yes. Yes.
And then it just snowballs, and he gets assignments in Germany and or all over Europe. And I don't know how you did it, but the research on his monthly income, you were able to get $10,000.
It's in those boxes.
$10,000 a month at some point. Is that
Frank's.
Frank's?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he was quite comfortable bring the estranged girlfriend from Hungary and they get married, right?
Yes, but the problem is, meanwhile, he's married the other one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a girlfriend that he met in Paris and they had a marriage for a few years.
Yeah, so on the left here we see them in back in Hungary, the with the girlfriend, and then Andre goes to Paris, and he and the girlfriend, there's some distance there. They lose touch. There's some back and forth, and then meanwhile he marries the woman in the middle, Roger Andre, um, who was also Hungarian in Paris. She was a painter, and they are married. She claims they had a long courtship and a very short marriage because when they go back to visit their families in Hungary, he rediscovers number one and ends up bringing her to Paris
Elizabeth.
without without divorcing the other one. um, and it wasn't that he was pretty hapless about such things, and it wasn't that he was trying to secretly, maintain two families. It was that he didn't have grounds to divorce Rogie here in the middle. Um, According to French law at the time, Rogie was sick. She contested the divorce. She had not committed adultery. She hadn't, checked any of the boxes. And I believe that the judge probably ordered them to reconcile. Meanwhile, we had Elizabeth, the old girlfriend, who's now arrived expecting to get married, and so this is before databases, so you marry one over in the 14th arrondissement and the other in the 15th, and Rogie in the middle though remained Andre's legal wife until her death several decades later.
Um, so I want to rush this because we're running late a little bit, but Nazism rises in Germany, becomes untenable. He's also the money starts to dry up.
That's the key thing.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. So Hitler comes in and he loses this very lucrative German market.
Right. So he moves to New York very reluctantly in 1935. Never has a hard time, has to work for Home and Gardens for many years, hates it, and always carries a grudge against America for 20 years of not getting much attention, right?
Yes. So on the one on the left here, the image is called Lost Cloud. So here's the comparison. You're in Paris and you want to meet an important editor, they're at the Dome. You're in New York and the editors are no cafes to do business in. There's these enormous skyscrapers the size is Rockefeller Center. So he's very much at a loss. This was only 2 years into his stay in New York, or not even. And he comes upon this lost cloud, as he calls it. So very much a metaphor, as a kind of self-portrait of Andre in New York City. And I put up this other one too, as I think one that really sums up his anger at America, because he found everything here too transactional. So it was all about money. It was all about commerce. It was all about putting up barriers to the type of image that he was doing. This is sort of poetic European image. This was not, what editors wanted. I have to though add that part of the problem was not just that the Americans couldn't see his work for what it was, but it was also that Andre couldn't wouldn't explain. His English was terrible. Actually, his French was terrible. He really had a terrible time with languages. So he didn't have the words, but he also didn't have the desire. He said photography, you do it. You don't explain it. You just do it. And that wasn't enough.
So I wanted to quote, summing up this odyssey. If I can find my quote now. In Hungary, his photos reveal his joy at being alive with family and friends. The Paris work embodied the maelstrom of creativity in interwar Paris and his own growing social life and confidence, and the New York work becoming darker, estranged.
Yes.
Very nice. Thank you. I like that. So I've always felt that the art world evolves reactively on a pendulum motion over decades and generations on the big issues, formalism versus expressionism, and Dionysian approach versus Apollonian. In photography, it seems that there are concomitants. You mentioned that Ansel Adams, who doesn't come off particularly well in this book, as a formalist and conservative, and did not like André's work at all. You quote Adams saying that André's work was the greatest perversion of serious photography that has ever come to my attention. What did he do to piss off Ansel?
Well, I have to say it was not only Ansel. In fact, for a long period, you would sort of, there were a few people who spoke up in favor of André's work, but you always kind of, scratch the surface, and they turned out to be Europeans who had ended up in the U.S. So there was just this sort of blindness to what he was doing.
I think he and you mentioned this in the book, that he kind of ran into some of what we're experiencing today, this America First isolation, chauvinism, you foreigners with your weird experimentation and surrealism and experimentation it's not American. That Americans should celebrate the Western landscape and American ideals.
Well, in the 1930s, there was certainly a search for what was quintessentially American in art. I mean, not just photography. So
Right.
he did run up against that, and then came the war years, and of course, Hungary was allied with the other side, with the Axis. So that was an issue. After the war, he still didn't know where to move. He needed to work for a magazine. Magazines had often the staff that they needed. So as you said, he ended up as a staff photographer for House and Garden for 15 years, which was a humiliating and frustrating experience. Even though if you look at those issues of House and Garden, he did beautiful interiors. I mean, in that context, I mean, his work was just extraordinary. And if we have time, may I tell
Sure, please.
one anecdote of how he came to be rediscovered in America. So things began to shift in the 1960s after he left House and Garden, and was determined he was going to give this one last try. He was going to put aside this magazine work and focus on his own vision, his own prints. And so one of the things that happens is early 60s, he's been angling for years to have a show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And he's just systematically blocked, particularly when the photographer Edward Steichen is in charge of the photography department. So Kertész does not like Steichen's work. Steichen does not like Kertész, and neither one makes a secret of it. So there's no chance until Steichen leaves, which he does in 1962, and a new curator named John Sarkowski arrives. And Sarkowski makes it known that any photographer can come to the museum on a Wednesday, bring examples of his or her work, leave them off, and pick them up the next day, knowing that Sarkowski would have looked at them, probably left no note, but would have seen the work. So one Wednesday, André arrives with his photographs. Most photographers bring about 50. André arrives with 500. And he goes to the desk in the photography department, puts the work down on the desk, signs in, and takes off. Sarkowski's office is across the way, and Sarkowski's been observing this fellow who's coming in. Andre's 68 years old at this point. So Sarkowski's been observing and is reminded of Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman. There he is, this old guy still peddling his wares, still trying to make it. And so Sarkowski then says to the receptionist, "Who is that guy? Who is that old guy?" And she looks at this, well, he says his name is André Kertész. And Sarkowski goes, "André Kertész. I thought he'd been dead for decades." Because he's been, just a few blocks away, but he's been doing this work for House and Garden, and he's been invisible in an art world context. And so the next day, André does come back, and André's escorted into Sarkowski's office, and they begin talking about a retrospective, which happened in 1964. So that was one of the steps on the way back to what was eventually a very successful career, exhibitions around the world, fame, fortune, etc.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's almost hard to believe. The end of the book is like a artist's fantasy of what's going to happen. He has really flown, and he had the energy to fly in his 80s all over the world.
He did.
To do exhibitions, to get honors and awards, giving his archive to the French Republic. He got the little
the Legion of Honor.
Legion of Honor. Yeah. So that was kind of a sweet ending to this saga. I wanted to go back to one point. So André was Jewish and a secular Jew, not religious at all, possibly an atheist, probably an atheist, do you think? No?
Sorry, what point are you making?
That, well, I was saying that he was a secular Jew, but
right.
Probably an atheist as well. Do you think that's not true? Or
yes, no, I think that's true.
Okay. At the time of his growing up and his maturity in Europe, to be a Jew was to absolutely be othered. But other things contributed to a kind of alienation that he had his whole life. His speech problems as a child, we had to have speech therapy, right? He could not speak articulately in French or English, which you write about caused people not to be comfortable in his presence, not to understand anything he said. So all these things, he was also partially colorblind, you found.
That's true. Yeah.
So lots of things pushing him to the outside of feeling part of the world. And then I think you write about how that is in part reflected in his favorite thematic subjects, empty benches, the body's absence and presence in the same thing. I think it all relates, in my mind, to being an othered person. Is that makes
Well,
sense.
he grew up in pre-World War One Budapest, which was a very progressive, um, modern city. First subway in Europe, newly electrified, um, and 23% of the population of Budapest was Jewish, and Jews were disproportionately doctors, lawyers, journalists, writers, and so there was this vibrant culture. He took advantage of it. He went to the theater, he went to concerts, he went to museums. So I think there was um, that sense of you this was his home.
Right.
But then came World War One, and everything was destroyed. The this vital culture disappeared, and I think at that point, and then having to immigrate, of course, empty benches when you're an immigrant, absence is as much as presence is part of your life. Yeah.
Um, okay. Can I ask you to read one final?
Yes.
I think we talked about that at the beginning of the book you have an absolutely beautiful quotation that you chose from Nabokov, and I think it gives great insight into both Nabokov but also André. If you
Yeah. So this is the epigraph. This capacity to wonder at trifles, no matter the imminent peril, these asides of the spirit, these footnotes in the volume of life, are the highest forms of consciousness. And it is in this childishly speculative state of mind, so distant from common sense and its logic, that we know the world to be good. Vladimir Nabokov.
So we have 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has questions.
And then you can. If you would. You can pass that.
I don't use the mic. Why was
We need.
Oh, okay.
We're recording. Thanks.
Why wasn't the archive in New York accessible?
I don't know exactly. Sorry. Look at you. His prints are in New York, but it seems that there are also a number of papers, and I don't know what those papers are.
I think at the time you're talking about him growing up in Budapest, roughly speaking, there was an extraordinary flowering in Vienna at the same time, in the
Yes.
Austro-Hungarian Empire. Did that affect him at all?
Well, certainly the fact of being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire did. I mean, he was recruited into the army when the war broke out. He was sent to the Russian front, where, by the way, he spent his time taking photographs that do not look like war photographs. They look almost like summer camp. So there was that aspect. And after he was wounded, he was quite severely wounded in the arm. After he recovered from that, he was sent as a kind of messenger, still during the war, to these distant parts of the empire. And that was, in effect, a chance for him to take many photographs of all kinds of things. I mean, he was just interested in everything he saw around him. So to that extent, it was, it was important to his well-being.
So Tina Bodocti, then Joan Mitchell, now Andre. What was the interest for you? You have to spend 10 to 15 years with each of these artists. So what was the through line, if there was one, or what was the intrigue that made you want to write about and spend the time with them?
I think the through line is artists whose work I not only admire, but that I have a visceral response to. I mean, you're going to live with these people for 10 years. You're going to live with this work for 10 years. So it has to be something that kind of overwhelms you. I also realize that I like to write about artists whose work I think has been undervalued. That was the case with Modotti. It was the case with Mitchell at the time. Now she's everywhere, but back then this was the first ever biography of her. And the same with André. I mean, he's been famous at various periods. He was famous various periods of his life, but he's also now fallen into, kind of general he's unknown by the general public. So I think there's that desire to bring them back to life, bring the work back to public attention.
I wanted to find out if there was any intersection with Stieglitz and Julian Levy, either one of them. And then my second question is how much interest he had in seeing other photographers' contemporaries' work as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Stieglitz, André did go see Stieglitz soon after he arrived in the U.S. because he admired Stieglitz's work. He liked its interpretive quality. So he took these distortions. André had been making distortions in, using reflections and distorting mirrors. He took these to Stieglitz to get his response, thinking that Stieglitz would praise them and that would help André get a toehold in this country. Stieglitz said, "Oh, well, it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick," which I think he was. I mean, these photographs required great skill, but anyway, that was Stieglitz's response. So André was disappointed. Levy did show André's work in the context of European photography, but that's as far as it went. And then you're asking also about André's response to other photographers. He was very fond of the work of Harry Callahan. He liked Walker Evans, although I don't believe they knew each other. W. Eugene Smith, I think they had a good rapport. So those were the Americans that he spoke out about. But in general, the whole F-64 straight photography was, that was a sore point.
Yes.
Mine is simple. The question is, what was his age compared to Robert and Cornell Kappa?
So he was older. He was older than
He was older.
he was older than Robert. He and Robert Kappa had an almost, I want to say, a kind of father-son relationship. So André had helped Kappa enormously in Paris, including Kappa arrives, this scruffy kid, and doesn't have any money. He sleeps on André's couch. He comes to André's house for dinner. So all along, André had mentored Kappa. Yeah, and then after Kappa died, Cornell Kappa was present. So Cornell was younger than Robert. He and André, though, had a relationship. It was, I mean, there was quarrels, but they had a close relationship. Cornell Kappa helped André a lot. André also helped Cornell Kappa with his work, which was one piece of work that helped Kappa get to the point where he could found the ICP, the International Center for Photography in New York.
Great.
When they met,
Thank you.
Kappa was still using Hungarian.
Yes. Kappa was they were all Hungarian born. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. Anyone? Yes.
I wonder, I imagine you learned a lot. You didn't know everything to begin with, of course. what were some significant or a major significant surprise for you in your research, which I assume is you put in the book?
One thing that surprised me, or that well, let me come at that question two ways. One thing that I didn't know about, but always wondered about, was what happened to Andre's family in the Holocaust, and how did that affect him? Because he didn't present himself as Jewish in this. I mean, he didn't hide it, but he didn't present himself as Jewish. He said, I didn't want to carry that baggage. Think of me as cosmopolitan. And yet, here was this extended family living in Hungary. Thanks to Georgie, I found out that, in fact, he had lost a lot of family members, including some who were very close to him. So that was something that I didn't know anything about, and now I'm very glad I do, because again, it rounds out my my idea of who he was and what might be actually in the images that comes out in indirect ways. The other thing that I mean surprised me, the other thing that was an evolution, was that the more I looked at his work, the more I saw. I mean, I think he was just an amazing photographer. His work lends itself to long looking, repeated looking, and thinking, and knowing about his life story adds another layer of meaning to what you can see.
Patricia Albers, Renny Pritikin, thank you so much for gracing our hall.